Thank you very much. Presiding Officer, both the First Minister and John Swinney have said that Scotland pays 9.9% of tax revenues into the UK and receives back only 9.3% of public spending. That suggests that Scotland pays in more to the UK than we get out. Could the First Minister please tell me how much money is 9.9% of tax revenue and how much money is 9.3% of spending?
First Minister.
Yeah, the surplus of revenue over spending in that year was, in memory, £4 billion, and that contributes to a surplus over the last 5 years, a relative surplus compared to Scotland and the UK of some £8 billion. That is, of course, the point of doing the statistics, because the unionist parties, Labour, Tory, etc., have always wanted to say that Scotland has higher public spending. And, of course, that is true, and for very good reasons. But Scotland also contributes more in terms of revenue, and that's why taking the 9.9% of revenue compared to the 9.3% of spending, because it shows that Scotland is in a stronger fiscal position than the rest of the United Kingdom.
Johann Lamont.
It's a classic First Minister. If you don't like the figures I give you, I've got another set prepared from earlier on. He didn't answer the question I asked him about the way in which he misrepresents those figures. According to his own GERS figures, 9.9% of revenue comes to £56.9 billion, and 9.3% of spending amounts to £64.5 billion. So actually, Scotland gets £7.6 billion more out of the United Kingdom than we put in. Isn't it the case that if the Scottish Government's own figures show that we get more money out of the United Kingdom than we put in it, it is deeply misleading to try to give the opposite impression?
First Minister. Order. First Minister.
Due to a range of things, including the economic crisis, the vast majority of countries in the world have been running deficits over the last few years. There have been some exceptions, of course. Norway would be a grand example across the North Sea. But we have exactly the figures of deficit between Scotland and the UK. 2008-9, Scottish deficit was 2.6%. The UK deficit was 6.9%. 2009-10, the Scottish deficit was 10.7%. The very height of the economic crisis, the UK deficit was 11.2%. 2010-11, deficit coming down, 8.1% in Scotland, 9.5% in the UK. And the last figures we have available, a deficit of 5% in Scotland compared to 7.9% in the UK. So for each of these last 4 years, the Scottish deficit is lower than the UK deficit. That is why we're in a stronger fiscal position. Of course, we don't get the benefit from that because the money is sucked into the maw of the London Treasury. And I've got to say, I really welcome this line of questioning, because we can actually put that into what the difference is. That is to say, the money that would have been available in each of these years. It would have been £6 billion in 2008-9, £667 million in 2009-10, £1,993 in 2010-11 and £4,376 in the last year, making a total of over £12 billion. Or to put it in terms that Johann Lamont and I will appreciate, £2,397 for every man, woman and child in Scotland. That is what would have been relatively better off if Scotland had been running its own finances.
Johann Lamont. Order.
In all of that, he didn't respond to the question I asked him, which is, by his own figures, more out than we put in. And the First Minister should also recall that his own Finance Secretary, in his private paper to his Cabinet, confirmed that Scotland will have a larger deficit than the rest of the United Kingdom by 2016. But of course, that was for private consumption and not for the rest of us. Because if the First Minister could put down his statistical Tommy gun for a moment, randomly spraying out figures about questions he wasn't asked, we might get somewhere. I have asked him about two specific figures. Quite simple. What Scotland pays into the United Kingdom and what the United Kingdom pays out to Scotland. Can he confirm that Scotland puts £56.9 billion into the UK in tax, as it states on page 598 of his own white paper? And can he also confirm we get £64.5 billion back, as per page 68? These are his own figures. Can he confirm his own figures are correct and show that Scotland gets more back for the United Kingdom than we put in?
First Minister.
I'm glad that Johann Lamont has cited the white paper. It's in pages 72 to 76. And of course it shows, if I could just correct her, that Scotland's fiscal position in 2016-17, the first year of independence, will be stronger than that of the United Kingdom. I've tried to explain that in each of the last 4 years, Scotland has run a deficit. That deficit is much lower than the deficit being run by the United Kingdom as a whole. That means we're in a stronger fiscal position. Our finances have been stronger over the last 4 years. We didn't get the benefit of that because we're run from London. Now, in terms of borrowing, some of the many remarkable statistics, the Better Together head Alistair Darling, combined with George Osborne, and that is a combination that's quite normal, this pair between them have borrowed more than every other UK Chancellor in the whole of history. The UK borrowing has more than doubled in the period of office of Darling and Osborne. That is the extent of UK borrowing. We would have been £12 billion relatively better off. And I don't say we could have spent all of that money, although some of that expenditure would have been very useful in the capital infrastructure of Scotland. It would have been sensible to borrow less than the UK has done over the last 4 years. So it would have been a combination of borrowing less and spending more, using that better position to power Scotland forward. So we have a smaller deficit over the last 4 years than the UK. That is beyond doubt. Can Johann Lamont not see that that translates to we'd have been in a stronger fiscal position? And for the people of Scotland, what that means would have been able to use Scotland's massive resources to benefit the people and the economy of this country.
Johann Lamont.
It's an interesting sidelight. The First Minister has now denied what John Swinney said in its own private paper, that we would have a greater deficit by 2016. But, you know, I don't think any of us should take lectures on economics from a First Minister, even a Royal Bank of Scotland economist who said in this chamber on the 28th of November, we get 9.3% of the spending, but we raise 9.9% of the revenue. 9.9% is greater than 9.3%. Even a primary school child could tell you it depends what the percentage big figure is of. It is not credible. Since the First Minister embarked on his referendum campaign, he has been making promises he claims he will deliver if Scotland votes yes. But his own figures show that there would be even less money to spend if Scotland votes to go independent. In the real world, where we look at the figures, where we talk in private as we do in public, that is a fact. Isn't it the truth that not only will the First Minister be unable to make good on those promises, he won't even be able to deliver on what we have right now?
First Minister. Order. First Minister.
When Johann Lamont started this line of questioning, I thought she really understood it, but was trying to make some political points. Now I'm beginning to think she actually doesn't understand this point. Yes, 9.9%, as every school child and perhaps every former English teacher should know, is greater than 9.3%. And if you have 9.9% of the revenue, Well, I'm sorry, Alec Johnston, 9.9 is greater than 9.3. If you have 9.9% of the revenue and 9.3 for the spending, you're better off. If it was the other way around, you'd be worse off. But luckily for Scotland, we've generated 9.9% of the revenue for 9.3% of the spending. That means we would have been running a smaller fiscal deficit than the rest of the United Kingdom, or we would have been in a stronger fiscal position. Now,
Mr. Johnson,
a stronger fiscal position in London is perhaps not too much. I mean, just about every other country in the world is in a stronger fiscal position. But it does indicate how we could have mobilised the natural resources of Scotland to maintain spending as well as borrowing less over these critical years. Now, we can't do anything about the last 4 years of these figures. That money is gone. But what we can do is take the lesson for the future, because in every single one of these years, when we were in a better position than that of the United Kingdom, and therefore would have had the freedom to invest in our economy, or to borrow less, or a combination of both, the Tory and Labour parties were never fond or end of telling people in Scotland how poor we are. The figures demonstrate we're relatively better off. We're in a stronger position. That is true in the last 4 years. It will be true in the future. Isn't it high time that we have mobilised these resources to benefit the people of Scotland?